Right, so welcome. Thank you for being here. I know it's been a while. It was a very long semester. I hope all of you had a great run. For those of you who will primarily listen to this, we are going to be attempting something different. I don't want to say there's a particular reason why. Like, it's not like something like, oh yeah, like a whole lot of thought went into it. But it seems right, the move, and it's because I like to use more than just audio. I really enjoy video. So this past semester, I was able to capture footage for my university and create some videos, and it was a good time to be able to get back there, put those skills to the test. I mean, it's not like anyone, myself, right? I'm speaking of myself, has a superior ability to use that medium, right? There's some people that make absolutely phenomenal films, and shout out to them. Like, their craft is excellent. But it's something that interests me. I think it's like, if you have paper, might as well write. But I do like crafting stories, and I think I'm okay at that. I think I'm good at presenting information, though, and so that's usually the focus of this type of art, the spitball for the Vulgate, and I think part of like navigating the titles and mostly navigating the titles, because it is kind of like a marketing tactic. This is what we are. It's like an identity, but I wanted it to extend as a larger identity, like with the spitballing. Like, just can we create these conversations that are about things other than what creates angst in public spaces? I can't claim if that was successful or not. I don't know. We'll have to see. It appears, though, that if you want immediate results, it doesn't appear that way if you just like, okay, this existed for a year, and one has to wonder if things are getting better or if things are getting worse. But the conditions of the day are set by who knows how many years or moments in the past, like one time's oppressive law could be another time's, like, this law needs to change. It's not just a oppressive law. It becomes something that is just wrong, and I think through that I guess it's evolution through progressivism, no, because that'd be policy, but evolution, right? Through evolution, we begin to perceive differently, and I think that is why we see these title changes. Is spitballing just wasn't enough, like, we had a great time, Star Wars again is phenomenal, and that's mostly, we could just talk Star Wars, you and your neighbor could just talk Star Wars. It's so simple, so easy, so fun. It is fun, and there's like political ideas, and also like gold nuggets, that may lead to a successful way of existing with one's polis, right, or one's city. Like, don't deal in absolutes. Absolute forms of thinking just may be harmful. And so, I mean, even absolute judgments of yourself, like, I am this way, and like criticizing yourself, like, it's probably not that helpful. As opposed to being fair with oneself, thinking, yeah, I'm not the best, not the worst, but I'm somewhere in the middle, and like, that's cool. Like, becoming cool with that middle ground, or, I mean, at least it's ground. At least you're not floating in the clouds, you're grounded, but also, like, you're living, right? You're hopeful. You're also realistic. You're also there, right? Like, you're not your thoughts aren't all out like, yeah, that group's bad. It's like, what gives one a right to ever determine that? So anyways, ideological polarization, I was going to talk about that, but not really. So we're doing something different. And the point is to see how effectively I could deliver a script, like a developed product. Like, imagine, like, okay, the idea was, okay, so we had the Spitball, we talked about that. We had For the Vulgate. So during For the Vulgate, I was reading a lot of like ancient type of like Roman, mostly like Cicero. I wanted to make a podcast on Cicero's The Republic, and during that time, it's like just read the philosophy, read the words. Like I really do hope you do that, but I'm like, if you do read those words, hailing from like even something more recent-ish in like Aquinas, right? And the one I enjoyed was Augustine, and thinking about how they piece together language to describe very abstract concepts like God, or sin, and relaying that in a relatable way. Like, I just wanted to get these pears or apples or something, and just wanted to pick them and like steal them and throw them at people because I just wanted to. And it's like, that's not a nice thing, Augustine, but he talks about that. He's like, this part of me exists. I'm not gonna lie. This part of me exists, and here's an example, and he makes it alive, like this concept that's been around, and like I think Dante, I don't know when Dante's Inferno, if it was written before or after. Let's check that out, just for the sake of like, because we can, and maybe you would, but like I think it's interesting to see which one's talking about sin first. Is it going to be Dante's Inferno, or is it going to be Saint Augustine's Confessions? Let's see, date. So it was written AD 397 through 400, so somewhere in there. And I think Dante's was like way late, actually like super later. Printing press, so like probably like 1412. No, probably before, like 1448. Let's see, Dante's Inferno date. I should probably know that, huh? Oh wow, I was off by 100 years. So 1317, even before the printing press, and I think that's so Dante's over there 1,000 years later, talking about the manifestation of sin into the realm of the earth, and puts it's like a poet. It's very poetic, and that one's awesome, and might have to read it this summer. But anyways, moving on. So, For the Vulgate explored basically that type of like, that's what we were doing. Very philosophical. Like, it was. Very abstract. In the past it was, but it was so real. It was so ingrained in reality. It was like, it seemed true, and I miss some of those podcasts because, it is how I wanted people to talk on the streets, and there was like other concepts other than Star Wars, of course. And I think that's when I felt the need to change over, and For the Vulgate is like, this is the reason why, for the people, and a lot of the philosophy, or through the tradition philosophy, a lot of this material was rooted in tradition, which is kind of ironic because I've talked about deconstruction and breaking free from tradition, but I still can't help but pull from tradition. Like, where else are you pulling from? Just your lived experiences. And I've done that, and I don't know if it has been helpful. So, this is me working within tradition to deliver a modern understanding of totalitarianism. Like, I just want to read what I wrote. And so that is what I'm going to do, because I've listened to Audible, I've listened to YouTube videos, and I love the Audible because like you could close the phone, it saves the battery. Like, there's all these logistical reasons why I enjoy Audible, and it's mostly because it doesn't kill my battery. So like, imagine if YouTube incorporated. So I mean, I know they have their program where you pay. Like my older brother, he has been, or had told me about the YouTube, like, no, or whatever, YouTube Premium something. And he could just lock his phone and just listen to podcasts all day, which he does enjoy. So I know he is a user of YouTube Premium or whatever, and he's able to enjoy podcasts. So I use Audible. To be honest, I haven't, because I just have been reading books, and I think I'm doing Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche, and I was talking to my professor, and he's like, that's just a bad book to do an Audible for, which I agree. It's a bad book to do an Audible for because of the language, and you want to see the words. Like, even if I'm over here talking these words that are on these paper and I like mispronounce some, like, it's like, okay, like, if I mispronounce or you hear something that isn't written, like, you may start interpreting the whole sentence as something, or even the whole paragraph, or even everything else that you could contemplate within that text. And so again, like, I'm gonna just see what happens with this. Like, I've done multiple types of tests using this technology because I think it's fascinating, and I want to share it with people that are listening. So, once again, we're going to try something new, and this is what I present to you: a modern understanding of totalitarianism, or dysfunctional utopia. Learning liberty versus learning restricted. 2024. I reimagine the words developed in Huxley's dystopian novel that remark, there was something called democracy, as though men were more than physico-chemically equal. That's found on page 34. I don't know what version you're using, but I cited this guy. What Huxley is describing is the common tendency found in his novel of totalitarian governments' desire to classify humans based on standards determined by the regime. My fascination of authoritarian systems and dystopian novels is a product of failing to understand how parts of the world remain so calm, even in the midst of dictatorships developing in the years that would follow the publication of Brave New World. To make matters even more ironic, the author, who crafted a prophecy about a restrictive government utilizing science to control the masses, was a descendant of a man whose lifework would be smeared by the antics of a cruel totalitarian regime. That man, his uncle, is known as Thomas Henry Huxley, who has been properly anointed as Darwin's bulldog for his will to defend the work of Charles Darwin. I find it necessary to assign a proper lens for those of the audience to understand a totalitarian regime beyond just the surface concept of Nazis attempting to take over the world. You'll see that in pieces of propaganda is really what I think they are, because you are influencing a perspective based off of maybe not all the facts. Like I love Saving Private Ryan, right? You love that movie, but even in that, you see this. Oh, there's too many scenes, but they're villainizing, the opposing side, which is fair. Like, it's a movie, and like the world perceived Nazis as villains, and again, like what they did was horrendous, But like, imagine if in like certain countries currently they are villainizing America, and what does that do to the way the world is structured? Like, really, what does that do? What does that do about our understanding? Like, McCarthyism, communism's an enemy, So, just to paint that idea, like, we're not just villainizing a group just like blankly. We want to understand like what's going on here. Like, why are they villainized? If they should be, right? Like, if they should be, which they are, and they're they deserve to be villainized through the examples you see. Because like, if you're just like everything in a totalitarian regime, every single person is fundamentally just evil. Like, that kind of claim is dangerous. But we'll get to that. For some, that understanding of totalitarian is pure theory. It derives from books like the one mentioned early on, like Brave New World, or the antithesis of that book. And if we want to be honest, or if anyone wants to be honest, they will recall the name of that book. But I'll mention it. It's 1984. Through this report, I will present the history of totalitarianism, discuss the current potential for totalitarianism, and present a simple solution that will remove the possibility of future totalitarianism. My hope is to vividly paint a living picture of totalitarianism as to move those reading or listening to consider the fine frames of time when democracy is present among, your experiences. It seemed fitting to mention Thomas Henry Huxley, not just for his kinship to Aldous, but for the matter that the improper implementation of his science into the public sphere seemed to be so aligned with the totalitarian movements of the time. So that's saying he has this science that was misinterpreted. Like that's not what these early evolutionists were really trying to do. They're talking about speciation, natural selection, right? Okay, so more so it is comedic that it is a page right from his nephew's book. Although those early biologist names have become associated with some of the ugliest isms of their time. Some of those are social Darwinism, right, and racism, which comes off of that. So the point of that is they, in the name of this science, they're like, social Darwinism's a thing and racism's a thing, and that is, again, the scientist was not attempting to achieve that. We should be mindful that it was not these scientists who led the masses into camps, these scientists didn't do that. Their theory was misinterpreted. So it's important to have a good understanding and challenge the theory and have different opinions of the theory, and play with it instead of just this is what is, this is the truth behind the world perceived through natural selection, or the theories of Darwin and Huxley. We should pay mind to T.H. Huxley's wisdom, the great tragedy of science, the slaying of a beautiful hypothesis by an ugly fact. Again, it lives here in this example. It was as if he had some sense of what was forthcoming when he wrote those words. The Nazi regime implemented a means of artificial human selection that became associated with social Darwinism. However, it was just a means for the Nazis to make Germany Judenrein, or cleanse from the Jewish people. There was no science or actual understanding of Darwinian evolution when the Nazis implemented a mechanism of artificial selection. Nazi science was fundamentally not science, as it was based on an ideology, belief, a creed. We could pay reference once again to T.H. Huxley when he wrote, "Science commits suicide when it commits to a creed. A killing of any people by a regime is not a product of science, but is an indication that the regime is totalitarian." There are some who may be wondering why I should even mention the Huxley lineage in a paper about totalitarianism. For one thing, Aldous' noble words could be perceived as being written in vain, as his words did not stop the countless authoritarian regimes and the two totalitarian regimes, the Nazi state, communist Russia, from emerging in the decade that would follow. We should consider that totalitarianism did not emerge in the Huxley homeland of England, although it could have. Yet maybe it did not emerge in England because of such an ability to freely print and express what one feels within the public spaces of the regime's rule. Some citizens could have been unaware of the development of totalitarianism, but those who read about the ideas that despotic governments were comprised of could take political action before such political action was not even possible. One thing we may agree on: despotic governments censor your speech. Again, the despotic government is a tyrannical government, and not every despotic government has to be totalitarian, but, like Hitler was an example of a tyranny, but it was also totalitarian. Aldous Huxley was not silenced on part that an attribute of democracy was present. So, yeah, he got to freely speak. Such a fundamental, inalienable right present in a democracy is the ability to freely express one's ideas at any given time. On the other hand, the ability to control speech seems to be the ammunition that fuels the totalitarian regime. Such controls all expression of the population until the population's expression is uniform. To make things even more frightening, that expression may be subject to the moods of the tyrant. Another component of the totalitarian regime is the political rulers control every aspect of private and social life in the society, as well as having so extensively political power that virtually no liberty or autonomy in decision-making is left to individuals or groups outside the political power system. So that is taken from a text on, I think it's the modern dictionary of, or like a dictionary of modern politics, and Dave Robertson. Let's find that. just so we have it. David Robertson, Dictionary of Modern Politics by Europa Publications. And that's from 2002, but totalitarianism, the definition hasn't changed that much. I mean, it hasn't been really talked about or discussed until probably recently, with some events. So let's go back to that point. Okay, so it is not even close to an oligarchy based on the examples that we have in history. So those totalitarian regimes are not oligarchic. Could be, but typically they had a dictator, right? So some examples of the totalitarian regime are Hitler's Nazis, Stalin's Soviets, and open for debate, Mao Zedong's China or the communist North Korean regime established by Kim Il-sung's lineage. And again, that's from the Dictionary of Modern Politics. So even if we do not have a terrific understanding of these exemplary regimes, we say that sarcastically, one Google search will take us to supporting evidence of the terrible nature behind the fascist regimes. For a moment, think about the Roma people, who were judged to be racially inferior through the Nazis' policies. While this unjust claim was applied to the Roma, the Nazis found it reasonable to wage genocide against this class of people, among countless other classes we know of, right? In the name of communism, Mao Zedong outdid Hitler and Stalin through his great leap forward policy, which led to the deaths of up to 45 million people, easily making it the biggest episode of mass murder ever recorded. It should be noted that communist regimes should not always be assumed as totalitarian. Yet, the communist regimes of the Soviet Union and People's Republic of China, they were totalitarian. These countries were not short to use fear to control the people, to withhold fundamental liberties like expression, and each of those regimes, they had a dictator. So, should we take pause to talk about how the dictator enforces his rule in a time before chemicals could be used to control masses? Like what Huxley predicted when he talks about Soma being pumped in the air to control the crowd in Brave New World. The secret enforcers in the Nazi regime would be the Gestapo. Hannah Arendt, in her work Eichmann in Jerusalem, The Banality of Evil, writes, all officials of the police, not only of the Gestapo but also of the criminal police and the order police, received SS titles corresponding to their previous ranks, regardless of whether or not they were party members. And this meant that in the spaces of a day, a most important part of the old civil services was incorporated into the most radical section of the Nazi hierarchy. It's a really curious thought, how the Nazi government really easily just transformed the active police of the previous state, the previous regime, and now it's the Nazi regime. So they basically take the previous state regime, the police force, and they all become Nazis, just like that. It was folded into the very fabric of the Nazis' newly conceived government. One where power diffused from Hitler to loyal servants who were supposed to be guardians of justice, as opposed to enforcer of laws that were unjust, So, as far as the other regimes mentioned, the respective agencies sworn to secrecy are the Guanbu, I may be saying that wrong, so I apologize, in China, State Security Department in North Korea, and the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs in Stalin's Russia. The state where there is a secret police should be examined in more depth, but such a militant force allows a totalitarian regime to impose the dictator's will upon the people. So if you see a secret police somewhere, be a little cautious. Further, it should be noted that when unjust policies like hunting a particular class of people by the local police occurs, then a nation should be wary of a political tyrant. The idea goes that the Nazis made many classes of people subordinate in their society to the point where they used policy changes to make those people illegal within a country that they were legally born in. Some of the other regimes mentioned simply did not allow any mode of due process of law and were murdering their own people. It was like the French Terror of the 20th century. But was occurring in Russia, China, and North Korea in the name of crafting an equal for all society via bloodshed? It's kind of ridiculous, right? Yet it was made evident in these examples that a non-democratic distribution of power led to the direct enforcement of indiscriminate arbitrary laws. In the words of St. Augustine, lex injusta nun est lex, commonly rhymed as, an unjust law is no law at all. In development, we should contemplate any clear injustice that may exist and how that may compare. So we should contemplate any clear injustice that may exist. Think about that. and how that may compare with the injustice that was lived under totalitarian regimes. So, sure, there may be injustice, and the law itself may be, just arbitrary. But is that law an indication that your regime is totalitarian? Well, the bit that I bring in might surprise you, but I hope to talk about it. Those regimes were marked by, again, the totalitarian regimes were marked by mass genocide. That piece of information was so readily available. It's readily available because it should be a warning, right? It's like a democratic warning for democracies, like dictatorships, genocide, right? So when a dictatorship is present in a given space of power, then people die in a lot of them. There may be some who refute this idea because they wonder if death counts in that country for that time period are attributed on behalf of the political ruler. So it's like there's all these deaths, but maybe there's like a famine that the ruler had no control of. Like, is a dictator responsible? But I would say, yeah, of course. It's still like, I think whoever is, like, especially if they're not really elected, like that changes everything. Like maybe there's famine because people aren't working, they're not motivated, they don't want to live, they're scared to live, and that changes the economy. Like if you don't have people working because they're scared to leave their home, it changes the economy. Again, that's a lot of, I guess it's like slippery slope thinking, but just saying, for example, Hitler basically changed, getting away with myself. I would state that it does not help the tyrant's case if they are secure in a position of power without any clear term limits. Like, again, like, if there's no hope of removing that tyrant, like, it changes the way people behave. They're like, this isn't democracy. I can't vote that person out. For example, Hitler basically changed all the rules of the German political system and even abolished other parties. Once a tyrant is in power, the tyrant attempts to change the law so a free election may not occur. Another way to minimize a free election is to monopolize an election under one ideology. Like, imagine if the Democrats and Republicans shook hands and made an ultimate team called the Democratic Republicans. That sounds familiar. How would you conceive of American democracy then? One may state that, or what they want about like political factioning. I said fractioning earlier, but factioning, either one. I think I'm going to go with fractioning, though. Dividing, like, you get it. So one may state what they want about political fractioning, but when more factions are being created and making political noise, then it is a good sound that democracy is winning, It's good if people are getting politically active, and some people believe in this and some of that. They're discussing the best way to approach the future, and they have free elections to decide who gets to dictate that future. For the time being, because they have term limits. So a lot of good stuff with democracy. This brings us to consider the current state of American democracy. As always, pay attention to the fact that we all are free to do anything reasonable under the current state. You don't want to cause someone else. You don't want to infringe someone else's liberty. So, you can't do that. You can't infringe someone else's liberty, and you may think the government's infringing on your liberty. We'll get to that. Besides the momentary lapse of being that occurred with the mandate to wear masks in public or to stay at home, see, that's what I was getting at. This was not overextension of a government's power. This was not, overextension of a government's power, because all governments were mandating quarantines for the sake of global public safety. Like, there's a pandemic. That's what we know, right? So let's get it under control. If one government is totalitarian for enforcing that unjust law, or what is claimed to be unjust, then that must mean that all the world's nations who are imposing these laws are guilty by association, or not even, but they're doing it too, However, this was clearly different from Stalin's Russia that referred to the kulak class as enemies of the people, swine, dogs, cockroaches, scum, vermin, filth, garbage, half animals, apes. I cited that. I'm not saying that from a source. The application of government mandates and mask wearing were done in the name of the public good and was supposed to be applied to all classes equally. Some states or populations of people may not have abided by that law, and some people may have appeared as deriving from a particular class of people. It should be noted that this was not a fault of the law itself, but a carrying out of the law. In addition, in some communities, they believed, and rightfully so, that enforcing such a law could develop into violence within the context of a digitally divided community of neighbors. One may hold opinions of justice of their own country, but something may occur when one comes across political intolerant groups that behave like mini sows with totalitarian potential. An example of such is when ideologically extreme groups abolish the need for political debate, as others are expected to agree with their ideology or risk being denounced as an enemy. That comes from Ambition in America by Dr. Jeffrey Becker. So, trust me, I'm guilty of simultaneously being one of these argumentative pseudo-politicians and sneering at those type of people who behave in that manner. Once again, what is reoccurring is a glaring issue with ideology, as it steers a polis away from democracy. In Hannah Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism, she claims that race as an ideology is one that would become conclusive. Again, like she's saying that when people believe in racism, right? So she's not saying what she's saying is racism as an ideology, right? Ism. It was becoming a thing even before she's writing, right? So she's not saying this to be true. She's saying racism as an ideology is one that would become, in someone's world that's racist, conclusive proof that an individual was well bred, that blue blood, royal blood, ran through his veins, and that a superior origin implied superior rights. So again, origin of totalitarianism, she's just saying like those who hold on to this dangerous ideology are going to believe they're better than other people. There's much debate on the concept of race, but believing any person has the right to monopolize classifications of people seems unfair to the classes which are deemed unfit. Such lack of fitness thus assumes that that class of people does not even have the capacity to deduce the intrinsic capabilities assigned to particular classes of people. Basically, it's like you're trapping a group of people, not even allowing them to say what they're capable of. It's saying this is what you're capable of because you're a part of this class, and we on top are capable of everything, including classifying you, putting you in a box. Finally, my analysis is simply an understanding, and this should not be adopted as ideology at all, because it isn't. This is just a little perspective in all the theory that literally exists. Like there's so much other things you could think about that matter way more. So albeit, I mean, this is the root, I guess, of it all. It's what I'm writing. It pays mine to the slogan that you could read in 1984 by George Orwell. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. How often is it that words become the motivating factor for political assembly? It seems so simple for words to become ideology. Next thing you know, the dialogue contemplating the removal of an official becomes public chatter until it makes its way to the Capitol, such as the untimely recall of a governor. However, simply considering the political mechanisms at hand, a recall brought upon by signatures of California citizens is another indication that democracy is breathing with the domain of America. In examining the totalitarian regime of the Soviet Union, Hannah Arendt describes the condition through this passage. The people of the Soviet Union are denied all forms of political freedom. Not only freedom of association, but also freedom of thought, opinion, and public expression. It looks as though nothing has changed, while in fact everything has changed. When Stalin died, the drawers of writers and artists were empty. Today, there exists a whole literature that circulates in manuscript, and all kinds of modern painting are tried out in the painter studios and become known even though they are not exhibited. Even within this context, Arendt makes it clear that a tyrannical totalitarian dictatorship begins to take on a new form once a dictator was removed. Although totalitarian mechanisms may as well have been still experienced in Soviet Russia post-Stalin's death, what Arendt witnessed was a sign of a Russian future aligned with democracy. That hope was delivered through forms of artistic expression present within time after Stalin's demise. One thing I may note, it does not seem that America is ever short of a story, talking about a story, meaning like we have this, the news is another animal. Furthermore, with the incorporation of podcasts, audibles, YouTube, this niche news source, or another avenue that delivers open for the public information, it may be difficult for totalitarianism to be kept under the radar. This does not mean that totalitarian features are not present in any given country. However, just because there may be some arbitrary laws, let me know, like if you disagree. There's some people that just don't want to listen, or get angry upon a sentence. It's fine though. It's totally fine. But this is about creating this public space where we talk together. Less argument, more listening, more understanding, and more trying to figure it out together. So, although there may be some arbitrary laws within a country, it does not conclude that the entity is totalitarian, despotic, or even dictatorial. There are certain criteria that need to be met for a regime to be classified into that class. Further, it is quite alright to distribute characteristics to a system, as it is a way of understanding that system and the components of it. It may be easier to understand the system if we state it is Russia in 1930 under Stalin. Some may quickly deduce extreme communism, and some understand it fits the criteria to hold the rare title of being an outstanding totalitarian regime. Moving on, even if one thinks their government is totalitarian, a terrific way to test your claim is to engage with your constitutional liberty. In Dr. Jeffrey Becker's Ambition in America, he writes, daily interaction with people different from oneself teaches citizens that human character more often comes in shades of gray, to use Hetherington and Weyler's taxonomy, rather than the rigid black and white categories of authoritarianism. Not only is there such an importance that comes through engagement in one's community, but it indicates that one has voice in their community. More so, it teaches about the vast ideologies that everyone may carry if they live within a democracy. Maybe ideological polarization is not simply adopting one of two ideologies over the other, but not allowing any room besides your own idea of reality. Once again, it may be important to take in Dr. Becker's words of advice and fill in the rigid black and white categories with a landscape of color. So thank you for listening. This was the first part of, I think it's like 4 or 5 parts. The first part entitled Learning Liberty versus Learning Restricted 2024, in this text called A Modern Understanding of Totalitarianism or Dysfunctional Utopia. Huge shout out to the family, my brother, my university, really, for providing, helping out and letting me just focus. To my friend Paige Peterson for always editing some of these documents and just creating good conversation. My friend Andy, his brother Austin, they've been on the show, so they have been instrumental. My friend Hobby, always thankful to my brother, and anyone else who I've pretty much there's so many people that maybe not, they haven't been on the show yet also, they may not be comfortable with being, advertised or, talked about. So they may want to remain anonymous, but anyone who I have talked about a lot of these topics with, thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the product. I hope I brought some type of understanding that you have so much purpose in this work that we're all doing to figure it out, but also we want to create a better world and healthcare for all, of course. There's other things, but in the most hopeful stem of logic, I want you all to know that you motivate me greatly and you add purpose to my life. So thank you so much. Have a good day and God bless you.